Yes, well, my pleasure. Very nice to be with all of you today. And it's really a big pleasure to be discussing leadership across boundaries with you all. And I'm sure that we'll learn a lot from each other. And I'm happy to welcome all of you. And we have wonderful panelists here today. I just got in, so I'm not sure if you already introduced yourself, but anyway, let me start from here. I am Viviane Barreto. I am the Associate Dean for Global Strategy and International Affairs at Fundação Dom Cabral, FDC. FDC is a Brazil-based business school, and we are very strong in executive education and also in degree programs. We have over 30,000 executives coming to our programs every year. And we are very happy to have the partnership with FHSU in the master program and actually in the degree program. So very, very happy to be moderating this discussion today. And I would like to invite you to introduce FHSU, please.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Brett Whitaker, and I'm one of the panelists that's joining you from FHSU. I'm an associate professor and the chair of our leadership program in the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Fort Hays State University. You'll be hearing a little bit more about our mission and stuff going forward, but FHSU is a regional comprehensive university that's part of the Kansas Regent System in the state of Kansas in the U.S. We have about 13,000 students, and those students are some of them traditional students here at our campus at Fort Hays, but many of them that's studying online, as well as students at international partnerships. And so we have a diverse student body that we serve across a whole variety of different programs. Our specific program is a social science-based leadership education program. So we have bachelor's and master's degrees in organizational leadership. And I just want to say I am so excited to be part of this. I think this is such a neat experience. It's been wonderful working with FDC over the last few years, but it's also this is a really neat opportunity, I think, to gather this group of people together. So I'm really looking forward to that, to our conversation today, and also to hearing what some of the thoughts are that the people that are joining us, all of you attendees, some of your thoughts as well as we cover some of these topics.
Thank you very much, Professor Brett. Well, to begin our conversation today, I would like to officially invite our panelists today. They're going to be Dr. Kaylee Klaus, Assistant Professor of Leadership and International Coordinator at FHSU, Dr. Brett Whitaker, Chair and Associate Professor of Leadership Programs, and Dr. Lívia Barakat from FDC. Lívia is a professor and researcher at the Strategy and International Business Center of FDC, and she teaches courses in international strategy, intercultural management, and positive impact. So I'm sure that with these three wonderful panelists, we are going to have a great conversation today. To the audience, to all of you who are with us, I would like to tell you and invite you to feel free to submit questions on the chat throughout the session, and we will invite participation a little later in the program, okay? So just make sure that you bring all your questions and comments. As I mentioned, we will be talking about leadership across boundaries. To begin, I'd like to invite our panelists today to introduce themselves and their primary area of studies. And I also would like to bring a question for the three of you about what are some upcoming trends or research streams in your field that particularly interest you in the next 5 years? Who would like to begin?
Oh, sure, I'll go first. My name is Kaylee Klaus. I'm an assistant professor for our leadership programs over here at Fort Hays State University. And I have a couple of different areas of research that I like to focus on. One is more of a hobby area, while the other one is kind of more career related. But the first one that I will be focusing on, especially in the next 5 years, is this idea of leader and leadership training and development programming and evaluating its effectiveness. So this is something that I have been really passionate about. I come from an assessment related background. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my slide. I come from an assessment related background. And so I've always wanted to know, like, what are the most effective ways that we can train leaders in any sector, public sector, private sector, wherever that might be, and what are the best strategies to actually develop those leader and leadership skills. So those are the areas that I will really focus on. You know, leader and leadership development is a very high dollar industry. I know that corporations spend billions and billions of dollars on it per year. And so it's important that we know that it actually works and find out what works. So that is something that I will continue to focus on, as I know that in the higher ed space, professional and continuing education, micro-credentials, all a lot of which is focused in that leadership, soft skills development is of major import. So I'll be focusing on that in the next 5 years. And then I have a hobby research topic that I like to look at, and that's like destructive and dark leadership in organizations, and just kind of figuring out what doesn't work. And so while on one hand, I like to figure out what does, I really am fascinated by this idea of dark leadership and kind of how those dark leaders get to where they are if they're just that bad. So that's what I like to focus on. So I'll pass it over to Brett or Livia.
Livia, would you like to go next, please?
I can go next, that's fine. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to our discussion. So I'm Livia Baracate. I'm a professor at Fundação Cabral. As Viviane mentioned, I'm focusing on international management, cross-cultural management. And my current research interests are on, I have done lots of research on cultural intelligence, what's the profile of a global manager, and not only an expatriate. As companies become more internationalized, they need different leadership styles and leadership profiles for different roles in this large network that is the multinational. So I have done lots of research on cultural intelligence and global mindset. And I'm currently interested in understanding what's the effect of having leaders that have high levels of global mindset in the way they address society's global challenges. So that's in the interface of the sustainability and impact strategy, and also the responsible leadership. So are these responsible leaders, how do they develop their global mindset? How does global mindset helps them to be more sensitive to the local needs, to be more sensitive to the problems that we face in the environment, in society? So that's my main research interest nowadays. And I look forward to our discussion.
Great. Hi, everybody. As I mentioned before, my name is Brett Whitaker. My background is in global leadership, so that's what my PhD is in. I have a PhD in global leadership with an emphasis area in higher education administration. So that's been a lot of my professional life is in that space. I also, it occurs to me, as both Kaylee and Livia were just introducing themselves, we did not coordinate this, but it sounds like I ripped off or that I'm copying people, because much of what was just mentioned is stuff that I'm interested in as well. I teach some courses and curriculum that do have elements of global leadership, cross-cultural leadership, as well as CQ and global mindset. So that's definitely interesting to me. As I was kind of thinking about this question, though, I think there's sort of two areas that I wanted to mention. One of those is really something that I think is very interesting and that will continue to be a productive research stream going forward is really in the area of cross-cultural effectiveness. You know, we had a lot of background and understanding on antecedents of effectiveness, but not a lot of empirical work on direct assessment of effectiveness. So we know what people desire, what attributes, characteristics people have. We know what value orientations, you know, support cross-cultural understanding. But I think that's an area that's ripe for more work, is looking at what actually produces value. What's the kind of end goal effectiveness that we'll see in cross-cultural environments. And so I think that's something that will continue to be important for a lot of us going forward. So that one, I know it sounds like I'm copying you too, but I'm not. I honestly thought of that myself before. Another area that I think is just very topical that I think we'll continue to wrangle with as a society, just a global society, is really coming out of the pandemic, how organizations are going to think about remote and dispersed work. I think that is going to continue to be a really important component of organizations and a hot topic for us to think about is dispersed and diverse teams that may be working across boundaries, including international boundaries. And I think that's going to continue. I think that's going to continue to be a competitive advantage for organizations that figure out how to do that work well, because they're going to retain talent. They're going to work with people in a way that makes them more effective. And I think it's going to be a competitive disadvantage for organizations that are recalcitrant or just don't try to adapt to that kind of new environment. So I'm very interested to see where that goes. And that's been a topic for a while, but it was catalyzed, you know, by the pandemic in a way that few other things have been in recent years. So that's really neat to me.
Well, fantastic. I'm so excited to listen to you, and at the same time reflecting on the importance of the development of global mindset. You're based in the United States, we are based in Brazil. We'll talk about some differences, but I can bring one that is very clear, that when you talk about Brazil, we are such a big country, but a very closed country. And just as a curiosity, when we have the accreditation sessions, like from EQUIS from the FMD in Europe or AACSB in the United States, one point that they highlight is the importance that FDC as a business school has to help open up the economy. And when we talk about opening up the Brazilian economy, we are talking about educating leaders to have a global mindset, to understand that the world happens beyond the Brazilian boundaries. And at the end, it's all about mindset, about what you're discussing, what you're talking about. And many times we see people saying that, okay, we are open and everything is okay. We have people from other countries here, but are we really getting the best benefit from having the good influence of another countries? Do we really embrace the difference, the different ideas, or we just, you come here, you come to the party, but I don't invite you to dance, So I'm very much looking forward to hear your experience and ideas on that. And just a quick question. Very, very good to know the interest that you have, but I'm sure that people who are watching us, they are curious to know what is the intersection between the dream that you have as a professor studying and the mission of the schools and the curriculum, and at the end, what is delivered to the students at school? What is your perception? Kaylee, would you like to start, or Brent? You
Sure.
Go ahead, Brent. Not everyone at the same time.
Yeah. I suspect Kaylee and I may have very similar perspective on this, but we'll see. We'll see what I say, if she agrees with me or not. So the mission of Fort Hays State University, the whole institution, is to provide accessible, quality education to Kansans, the nation, the world, through an innovative community of teacher scholars and professionals to develop engaged global citizen leaders. That's the mission of the institution. And so as we work through our own programmatic mission, I see tight alignment between that and the university mission, that we are in the work of trying to create engaged global citizen leaders. And the global part of that is not, that's not a meaningless part of the qualifier of engaged global citizen leaders, trying to create citizen leaders that have a certain degree of global or cross-cultural competence. That is a meaningful and articulated part of what we do. So I see this as our component of the mission is that we help to create some of those citizen leaders within an institution that values and puts an emphasis on doing that in a way that creates global competence amongst our alumni, but also even holding that to ourselves, that we're engaged and globally competent as scholars, as researchers, as faculty members, mentors, and so on. So I see a very tight alignment between what we do and what we say we're doing as a mission. Kaylee, do you agree with that, or would you like to add something?
I do agree with that. Yeah, I do agree with that. I think that in all of our programs, we have an undergraduate bachelor's degree, we have a Master of Professional Studies in Org Leadership, and then within the next year or so, we're going to be offering a Master of Science in Global Strategic Leadership. And in all of those programs, we are very intentional about each of those components, not the global, the citizen, the leader part. The classes that I teach in particular are very organizationally focused on organizational functions and behavior. And in each of those types of, subject areas, we talk about, the fact that your organization can't just live by itself in its own little world. It belongs to a much more, a larger global system. And so I think our programs are set in a unique space that we do align very well with our university mission. And we have a great team of people who all have expertise in some of these areas. I mean, we have a couple of people who are experts in service and community engagement, others that are experts in global leadership. And so we really take pride in that kind of diverse approach to leadership for us.
Maybe I can say some words about FDC as well, Viviane. And we have been working a lot together on this, trying to bring the mission of FDC to the programs. And I didn't mention before, but I also serve as an academic director for the Executive MBA, and we are getting ready for AACSB accreditation. And it's been a very interesting process for us because AACSB is very mission-driven, and that has FDC is mission-driven, and we already have that very much integrated into our programs. But this process of preparing for AACSB has made us realize that we need not only to dream, not only to desire or to believe that we are doing our best to deliver our mission, but we need metrics, we need processes, we need these things to be very tight and getting to the final result that we expect. So in this way, we defined at FDC the three main competencies that the school wants to develop in any person that does a course. We have from undergrad to broad members course. So in different phases of the career, we have courses for executives, for pre-experienced young people. So, but for any person that steps in a course at FDC, what are the three main competencies that we want this person to develop? One of them is the global mindset, as Viviane mentioned. We want to contribute to Brazil not being such a closed country, and this doesn't mean that these people will be traveling to every country, will be living abroad, or that we will be having lots of foreigners in Brazil. This means that Brazilian people will be more capable of understanding what's going on in the world, be aware of the trends in their industries, and to understand how they impact their own business, how they impact their career. So it's more of not only interacting with other cultures, but also to being aware of what's going on in the world, what are the trends, what are the challenges. So this is one competence. The second competence is the social impact. So as soon as you start knowing FDC, you will see that this is in our DNA. In every program, we are so concerned about developing society, bringing awareness about the big problems of the world, about ESG issues. So this is the second competence. That is, like I said, in my research interests, I think they are very much related, even though I haven't seen much research done on this interface, but I think it makes sense from a conceptual point of view that they are very much related. And finally, the third competence is the intellectual autonomy. Of course, we want our students to not only learn while they are here, but to be able to learn wherever they are. So when they are back to their companies and when they are back to their daily activities, that they are able to constantly learn and seek for knowledge on their own. So these are the three main competencies. I think it's they are the ones that drive all our curricula decisions in the degree programs or in the more executive programs. Vivi, please feel free to add.
Okay, well, I'm listening to the three of you on the perspective of a student. And what I have to say is that, well, the students from FHSU or from FDC, they are being taken care of in a very competent way. And I think that is very interesting, the message that Livia just brought, and I know that it's shared with FHSU, that is, you come to the school, you're taking your program, your course here, and it doesn't mean that you have to work abroad, that you have to move. We want to prepare the student to perform competently in anywhere. It can be in the inland of Brazil or in the United States, but we want to prepare the student to be able to understand the global possibilities. And this is something that's really important. And just last week, we had an award here in Brazil at FDC for the most internationalized Brazilian companies. And it was very interesting to know that there isn't like this, the connection of being international and being big company. We see lots of small and mid-sized companies. They are super international. Some of them are born globals. And they have so many possibilities that if the large companies had paid more attention on these possibilities, they would be doing far better than they are. So it's a constant effort. And especially in Brazil, we'll be talking about differences in Brazil and in the United States. It's not so common. You know, we are such a close country, so it's not common for people having such these super internal market that we have to consider the possibilities in the value and supply chain worldwide. So I would like to invite our audience to interact with us. We have a poll that Kaylee will be sharing with you, and we would like to ask you about what is the top challenge you face or you have faced when interacting with people from other cultures. So you pick one, and very soon we'll see what is the top challenge.
We have three
I'm sure
participants
some would like to pick more than one. That's why we have top challenge, because all of them.
Yeah, I think probably everyone has experienced all of those things at some point in their career.
All of you have You got the QR code there on the mobile phone.
Olivia, while we're waiting on those to come in, may I ask a follow-up question about what you mentioned on the mission? I don't mean this as a trap question at all, but have you found that other constituents that you work with outside of the institution find that unique mission of FDC, particularly in the environment, Vivian, that you were describing? Do you find that people find that valuable, or do you think that that's a hard sell, something that you have to really explain a lot of why FDC has selected that challenging, unique mission? And the reason I ask that is I feel like we find ourselves sometimes having to defend or articulate the value of why is it that Fort Hays, this regional institution in the middle of Kansas, which is in the middle of the United States, in a very seemingly non-international, homogenous kind of society, why has this university selected this component of their mission? And I think that's a very defensible thing, but it does require some discussion at times. Have you experienced that kind of thing?
Yes,
at
so
all?
let me go back to the mission of FDC. We contribute to the development of the Brazilian society through the education and development of entrepreneurs, business leaders, public leaders, and informal entrepreneurs as well, so everyone. And when we're talking about the development of society, we know that we need to work on the increase of productivity, of the better, we have to have leaders well prepared, and we have to also, as Livia mentioned, it's not like any kind of leader. It has to be a leader that's really focused on all the elements of the society. So one thing that is very important to contribute to the growth of the country and of the companies is the global trade. It is impossible to get innovation and to diversify risks, for example, to have access to technology, being a closed economy. But due to the way that Brazil, that the economy was developed here in the past, we kind of substituted the imports. We wanted just to develop our own industry. Okay, it's all fine, but it doesn't mean that we need to be close. And if we want to be global, if we want to be like a piece of the global GDP, especially considering the agriculture and fields where Brazil can play a very important role, it is important to connect with other countries. So just summing up, Brett, this is something that is not natural in Brazil. And Livia, I know Livia will agree with me. It's something that we have to remind all the time. And especially, we'll be talking about right now, when I look at the screen here, talking about what are the top challenges. There are many things, like we see here, the verbal communication and so on. For example, talking about the language. It's an important barrier for us. The English. People, they don't like to put themselves in situations where they won't feel comfortable. So there are many, many things. And just to close, consider Brazil is in South America, and we are about half of South America. We have the other countries that are so close to us, but they speak Spanish. And you don't find this close connection between Brazil and the other countries, and the language is one of the barriers as well. So now I would like to ask you your comments and your perception on the result that we just got.
I can start maybe. I think it's quite interesting that understanding verbal communication is seen as challenge, almost as challenged as non-verbal communication. So both are similar. We actually were expecting just one answer for each person, but from the percentages here, people voted for more than one. But that's because it's a hard choice, I understand. But as Viviane mentioned, and we know that our audience here is very half Brazilians and half Americans, and maybe some people from other countries. But we know that verbal communication is very challenged. But once the person overcomes this barrier, then other challenges play a more important role, and that's the second most voted here, the non-verbal communication, because there's no manual that we can actually understand everything about how people communicate in terms of their facial expressions, about their body language. It's more subtle. So for me, now I can say about my own experience in the short periods that I lived abroad, I think understanding nonverbal communication was much more difficult than verbal communication. Of course, when we are speaking a non-native language, we make mistakes and there are misunderstandings that very often, and maybe we don't understand something that another person is saying to us. But when it comes to nonverbal communication, there's not a very precise lesson or class that you can take that you will say, when the person does this type of face, it means this. When the person is with this type of body language, it means that. So it requires living in the country. It requires, if you are not living, at least if it requires you to be a very good observer. Observe, try to understand what's behind every sign, and that's not easy. That requires time, and that requires a lot of humility also, to understand that we don't know everything about the culture. So we have, if we put ourselves in the vulnerable position, maybe we can be open to learn, to observe and learn until we are really able to understand and adapt. That's what caught more my attention, but I will let my colleagues here to comment other points as well.
Yeah, Brett and I were talking about some of this earlier as we were preparing for this, and he actually has this really cool book. I don't know if it's still on his desk, but it goes over some like nonverbal behaviors across various cultures and countries, and it's something that you become kind of acutely aware of, but like you said, Livia, you don't really understand what some of those nonverbals are until you're actually in the culture experiencing it yourself. Even as something as simple as, in some countries, a woman reaching out to shake a man's hand is not okay. And so that's a piece of nonverbal that you really need to be aware of beforehand. And some, hand gestures, or even, and I'm always very sensitive about nonverbals, because I always say that I speak more with my face and with my sound effects than I do with my actual voice. And so I think about like some of the hand gestures that I make on a regular basis, and I'm like, oh, that's not okay in that country. So I need to be very careful about that. And so it is important that, regardless of where you're traveling to, whether someone from the US is going to Brazil or vice versa, or anywhere else in the world, that you are aware of some of those kind of behavioral customs a little bit, so that you don't catch yourself in trouble.
Yeah. So in some ways, I'm really not that surprised to see the results of the poll here. Communication, is a basis for our interaction, and it's a major stumbling block when we're working in cross-cultural environments. And to both of your points, I think I agree that in some ways, verbal communication is, I think people think of that as the most challenging part of this, because it's the most obvious direct barrier, right? I don't speak Portuguese. I can't communicate, right? But in some ways, it's actually the easiest thing to overcome, through translation, through interpreters, and even some technological tools that are coming along pretty quick, where we have maybe the ability to do live translation, algorithmic live translation for people. In a few years, that may not be that big of a problem for us. But the second thing, understanding nonverbal communication, and the last one from the bottom, understanding differential values, belief systems, that is going to be something that continues to be a problem. That's not something that we're going to be able to Google Translate away in terms of our developing understanding. And I as I reflect on times that I've made mistakes in cross-cultural exchange, where I've made an error of some sort, almost always that was not a verbal problem. I mean, when a verbal translation error comes up, we laugh it off and we go on with life. It was just a simple error. But times where there's been a piece of misunderstanding that drove out of nonverbal communication or out of differing values, sometimes those are sources of significant error. And I think about the fact that I know most people on this call probably are familiar with the concept of high context versus low context communication, right? But I come from a low context communication culture, and pretty much for those of you that aren't familiar with it, that just means to what extent is the meaning of the message codified in the words that are being shared, right? We share in the US, we share most of the meaning of the message in the words. That's what the words convey, most of the message. And in many cultures, much of the message is conveyed through other things that are not verbal, they're not words.
Brazilian culture.
Yes, and I've made some errors over time where I thought I was understanding something, even though I understood the words that were being said. I didn't understand the meaning that was being transmitted because I wasn't picking up on enough of the context within and surrounding the message. And that's the kind of thing that's tough. So those of you that voted that way, you're in good company, at least with me. I think that's a pretty common experience, and one that it behooves us to try and develop our competence around, because it's not going to go away. We're not going to be resolved of that one anytime soon, even if we make some advances on some stuff on verbal translation that's rapidly becoming easier.
And when
thank
it
you.
comes to
Go ahead,
I was
Livia.
just gonna make one more comment about the last point of the understanding and respecting different values, because that's when cultural intelligence becomes important, because you cannot navigate well in a cross-cultural situation, especially when the values are different, when the beliefs are different, the norms, without cultural intelligence. So that's the ability that will help you to understand that value. You don't have to change your values because you are interacting with a culture with other values, but you have to understand what's the essence, what does it mean for that culture, and how you can respect, even adapt some of your behavior, because something is maybe very important. And there's a concept that I like very much from Julia Middleton. I think it's super useful in this context. It's the concept, I don't know if you know, if our audience know of that, but it's very useful. It's the concept of core and flex, the attributes of a culture. So what she says is that the flex attributes are those ones that were not very much voted. So the clothing, the dressing style, the food, all those more tangible aspects about the culture that you can adapt, or that doesn't bother you if you have to dress more clothes, if you are in a culture that clothing is a taboo, or if you have to try something new in terms of food, because that doesn't interfere maybe in your values. But the core attributes of a culture are those attributes that are more about your essence, about your identity, your values. So what she says is that when you are interacting with someone from another culture, you should be flexible on your flex attributes. So maybe you can try to dance a different type of music, or try to eat local food, to be a little bit adaptable. If this is not something that is part of your essence, but what are your values, your core, you should not be flexible about it. Otherwise, you would be losing your identity when you interact with different culture. So I think this is very interesting because it also helps us to use our cultural intelligence in an intelligent way. We don't want to use our cultural intelligence just to be adapting totally to every single culture that we interact with, but we want to adapt on those things that will just bring more learning, will be fun, maybe will help us socialize, but in the things that are really important to us, we can stick to them.
Well, that's so important. And once again, you bring the importance of the culture and of being aware of what can be adaptable and what can't be. And based on that, I would like to ask you some ideas. Let's help our participants here who are already doing business in Brazil or in the US or getting ready to do. I think that would be good to talk about the aspects of the cultures, the Brazilian and the American one. We're talking about individualistic versus collectivist culture. And I think this is important to clarify, because lots of mistakes, they can be made not because people maybe didn't observe these changes. So I would like to invite you, you decide who begins, to talk about the differences in the cultures of the two countries. Let's help the audience here who's getting ready to do business.
I'll take a shot at it. Livia, please. No, you unmuted
No, please.
first.
I was just gonna say that one of the differences we just mentioned, that is the low context versus the high context. But please, feel free.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yes. I mean, I think, one of the challenges that that we can look at, how do you quantify, classify, capture what it means, what culture means, right? So orientations across cultural dimensions and values, and we've already mentioned a couple of those. Obviously within communication, high and low context. Vivian just mentioned individualistic versus collectivistic kind of perspectives. But here's the thing that I always reflect on when I think about this, and this is directly connected again back to what Livia just mentioned about core and flex perspectives, or sometimes we call that category width. What do we classify as right and wrong versus just different than how we do things? But the really tricky part, I think, about these orientations on different value dimensions is there typically is not a objectively correct or incorrect perspective to have on these things. Collectivist cultures are not right any more than individualistic cultures are right. High context is not better or worse necessarily than low context, but it absolutely feels like one of those things is right. All of us have orientations that feel natural. They feel accustomed to us. They feel like the way things ought to be, and that's because that's your worldview that comes out of your orientation on those values. And that is very hard to overcome at times. Even when you're mindful of it, right? Even when you know what's going on, it still is hard to accept that kind of value neutral orientation, particularly if you're dealing with something that's in that flex area where you determine, listen, this isn't like something that is life or death. I must oppose it, right? This is something I can adapt to. I just don't want to adapt to it because it doesn't feel like the way that I think things ought to be, right? And that's really, really tough, I think, because that element of needing to be kind of mindful and critical of your own value set and your own worldview, right, has to be married up with not selling out on the stuff that you do find to be your core values, as Livia was just mentioning. And that's, I think, a really tricky balance. And it gets harder even when you get into manifestations of organizational values, right? Like we have all kinds of educational policy, and how we treat those things is a manifestation of our value set, but it may not be the same as other places. I don't think that answer really gave anybody a practical sense of how it's easier, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a why it's difficult, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, and I will continue to talk about why it's difficult, because something that Brett said I want to piggyback off of is like our like cultural value sets have really influenced how organizations operate here in the US. And, you know, when we work with a variety of international partners here at Fort Hays, in addition to FDC, and the structures between this US institution and the international partners have made things more difficult. We have developed workarounds. We have, you know, adjusted what we can adjust, but sometimes laws just seem to get in our way. And so I can think about how a couple of different ways that even like our students here in the US struggle against this idea of the collectivism. You know, they take classes, especially like our online students, they take classes, you know, on their own. They're working on their stuff. They don't really care about the other students and how they're doing. They are progressing through their courses the way they need to, through their program at the pace they want to. It doesn't matter about anybody else. Whereas in other countries, you know, like Brazil, many of those programs go through a cohort model where a group of students start the program and start the course together, and they finish the program and the courses together. And so they really develop, you know, solid relationships and learn how to work together really well. Whereas when we put our students, US students, in a group project, they get super stressed and annoyed and challenged. And so you see that in just the main differences in how education works with us. And from an administrative standpoint, it also gets very complicated simply because, you know, what the partner may need may not be feasible from the other end. So, you know, what might be easy for, you know, somebody in Brazil, or we have a couple of partners in China which is also a collectivist society. What they may focus on is not easy for us to achieve, just because of the structure, the individualist structures that we've put in place in our organizations. And so I think it's important that, you know, as we go through these partnerships and we work together, it's important to honor and acknowledge those points of view, but we also have to make decisions. And I realize that that doesn't always solve the problem of the differing orientations, but it does kind of help, I guess, put a little bit more understanding into the decision making that has to happen.
Yes, I agree. And I think from a corporate point of view, I see that these differences, they impact a lot on when two companies are negotiating, or when they are one company. I study a lot internationalization also. So when a company is acquiring a company from a different country with a different management style, this impacts a lot. So it helps us understand, like you said, Kaylee, how decisions are made in organizations. So in organizations that in countries that are collectivist, the decisions are made collectively, and they tend to do lots of meetings and ask opinions of different people. It's more participative, the decision making. So it may also take longer, but this is a value for the country and for the organization, because it means that everyone agrees. Usually those cultures, they also avoid confrontation. So they are trying to get consensus by involving lots of people and making decisions collectively. On the other hand, the more individualistic cultures, they kind of trust more in the decision made by the leader as an individual who will make decisions more individually, but taking into account the interests of the company, the interests of the team, the industry. but it's a very different management style. And when cultures merge, when you are talking about, let's say, a merger of two companies from different cultural backgrounds, many challenges can arise. And one other point, just to mention one more aspect that I think we are different, US culture and Brazilian culture, is on the power distance dimension. So if you look at the Hofstede cultural dimensions, we have some differences. I think the individualistic and collectivistic is the most different, but we are also different in terms of how we deal with hierarchy, how we deal with power. In Brazil, we are higher in power distance. This means that we have high, we attribute status for higher positions. There's a distance in terms of the top positions in the company, the top leadership, and the lower positions, and not only a distance in terms of salary and more hierarchical levels, but also a psychological distance that people don't feel free to approach, don't feel free to criticize or to make suggestions, to confront. So that's also an interesting difference that it's important for us to be aware when we are interacting, when these two cultures are interacting. Not that we don't want to stereotype, but we want to at least be able to predict some of the challenges that we may have and be better able to understand. I just brought here, just out of curiosity, as I mentioned, the Hofstede dimension, just for us to share with our audience here how we are in terms of our differences if we compare Brazil and United States. And that it's a very interesting tool that is available online for free in this website, Hofstede Insights. And this is how we look like in terms of our differences. So Brazil is the orange and the United States is the blue. And you can see here that the individualism is the most different dimension in these two countries. I also mentioned about the power distance. And the other ones, uncertainty avoidance is also different. The other ones, not so much. But the uncertainty avoidance is how we deal with uncertainties, risks. And in Brazil, we tend to avoid more risks than in the US. So that also has potential impacts in the way we do business between these two countries.
Yeah, Livia, I so appreciate that you brought this up. And for those of you that maybe if you're sort of thinking about this for the first time or you're seeing some of this stuff, I think this is an incredibly important point too, because anytime this happens to be looking at a comparison of Brazilian US organizations, but anytime that you're in a cross-cultural environment, there's going to be a different mix of these kind of pain point areas, right? And if there's a takeaway here that helps you maybe navigate this, it's that you don't have to do it all, right? If two countries, two cultures share a similar value orientation, that's unlikely to be an area that's going to be a problem in navigating cross-culturally, right? So let's say if you look at something like, indulgence, masculinity, long-term orientation, those are unlikely to be areas where we have significant amount of difference of worldview. And so by thinking carefully about, well, what are the pain points? What are the areas where we do have significant difference? It lets you be a little bit more mindful of focusing on those things as you're engaged with that kind of cross-cultural exchange, so that you don't make an error in one of those places where it is likely that you may have significant worldview differences in terms of what your expectations are.
And Brett, building on what you just said, I just would like to add that it's very interesting to understand each one of these areas that as Livia just mentioned here on the Hofstede Insights. And I think it's really interesting to understand historically why these differences happen. It's very interesting, for example, if you go deeper on the risk-taking approach of Brazilians in the United States, for example. If you go and revisit the history, you learn more about the unemployment rate and the history of the jobs and everything. You see how open people will be to take risks. They have, it's like, I have a lot to lose, you know. So you're going to always to look at the glass half empty instead of half full. And it's really interesting. I think that it is an important part of the development of the global mindset that all the students that take our courses, they have this opportunity. So I think that you brought very rich elements to help people here in a very practical way. And you already talked a lot about some strategies to overcome problems that people face. And it's really interesting also because at the end, we're talking about feelings. We're talking about how people feel in situations, and we are helping them to be more prepared for the uncomfortable feelings that the situation may cause. And it's just like, be comfortable in the uncomfortable, and that's it. And let's try to improve every day. It's like speaking a second language. Okay, I can make lots of mistakes, but remember that I do speak another language as well. And sometimes we forget that, and we tend, especially Brazilians, if you consider the self-esteem thing, they will be always like apologizing for everything. So there are some aspects of both cultures that we really need to consider. So I would like to ask the three of you to bring like one or two strategies that you might recommend for effectively navigate these challenges.
Livia, would you like to go first? And she went last on the last one.
I was thinking, but I can go first. Which ones I would pick? Viviane asked for two, but
well, you can pick one. Like, what comes to your mind? Like, you've been through so many things. Like, if there was like one thing that you could recommend talking about the differences between the Brazilian and the American culture?
Well, the first thing I would recommend is to prepare. Even though we said that we don't know everything about the culture, and there's a lot that we learn while we are interacting, while we are living in the culture, there's also a lot of knowledge available about the cultures. So first thing is to prepare. There's lots of knowledge available. You can also take there are intercultural trainings, and companies are doing that more and more. I was participating in the morning in a session here in a conference in São Paulo, and they were talking about how companies are taking more seriously the intercultural training. And some companies take for granted the potential impacts about the cultural differences on the well-being of their employees, on the corporate climate. So one thing is to prepare. When you are, when a company is becoming internationalizing, or when you are preparing for a global career, is to prepare to understand all the cultures, to read as much as you can from international news, books from foreign authors, read about that culture, talk to people who lived there. So one thing is to prepare. And the second thing is to know yourself. I think when we know ourselves, we are able to distinguish between that core and flex. So what is my identity, and I will not adapt, I will not change, and what's okay, I can try something new, I can change how I make gestures, because that culture will maybe interpret not so well. So I think it's when you know yourself, you are also more confident and more prepared to understand your boundaries.
Haley, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah,
go for it.
I like what you said about know yourself, because I was going to say self-awareness. I am very self-aware of what is not my natural habitat. And so that's how I like to describe, like, when, somebody when I'm working with somebody from another culture and they're moving so much faster, they're working really last minute. I'm like, this is not my natural habitat. I can't work last minute like this on big projects, and so just being very self-aware of, I think, what your comfort level is, and kind of just preparing helps kind of make you a little bit more comfortable, I think, and that just really kind of helps ease, I think, the stress when you're in a cross-cultural situation. I was also going to say, try to develop relationships. I think that really helps. I mean, from a business standpoint, when you're working with kind of cross-border businesses, you have a rare opportunity to develop relationships, maybe like prior to actually immersing yourself in another country or in another culture. And the better that you can do that beforehand, I think makes, I guess, your fumbles in the other culture a little less stressful, just because you have that relationship to back you up, to help support you and teach you the right ways to go about things. That is something that I've always found really helpful in my position when I've worked kind of across boundaries like this with FDC, with our partners in China, is that I do have good relationships with the folks on the other side of the ocean or the pond. I've just never met them in person, but I have those good relationships, and I think that will do me a great amount of good once I immerse myself in the culture in person.
So once again, I find myself sort of saying the same thing, but I'll take this in a slightly different angle. Preparation obviously is incredibly important, but if I have a specific recommendation, it is when you're engaged in cross-cultural exchange, especially in a new environment that you haven't worked in a lot, I would strongly encourage all of you to do what you can to try and avoid cognitive overload. Trying to avoid putting yourself in a situation where you are trying to do sense making, but you're doing sense making on too much stuff, and where you're more likely to make an error. So just to give you, just to put a tiny bit of context around that, all of us are doing sense making all the time, right? Like we're attributing meaning to the experiences and the things that we're observing and the things that are happening around us. And that sense making, is in a monoculture environment is largely automated. We do a lot of that stuff automatically with very little conscious thought, with very little effort, and in many cases, relatively accurately if we're interacting with people from a similar culture, right? And when you're operating in a cross-cultural environment, you only have a limited capacity to do that sense making consciously, right? Like you have cognitive limits to what you can focus on at once. And it's very easy in a new cross-cultural environment to get into a state of cognitive overload where you're just overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that you're trying to navigate. And when you're overwhelmed, you make errors. You make bad mistakes. You make attribution errors where you assign the wrong meaning to something, or you make procedural errors, behavioral errors, all kinds of stuff. So the first half of that is preparation. Preparing yourself helps you be more prepared for the exchange so that you aren't going to get overloaded. But there are also specific techniques for managing cognitive overload, like just thinking about what am I likely to experience, and then how can I regulate that environment so that I put myself in the best situation. For example, you might think about if you're operating in a very different cultural environment than what you're used to, and you haven't interacted with people from that place very much. Thinking about a cultural guide or a coach, that you can talk to that'll help you navigate that kind of some of the things we talked about earlier, right? Like the nonverbal, value-oriented kind of things. Somebody like that can be very helpful to you in terms of navigating that stuff. You might, if you're uncomfortable with a second language environment, maybe having an interpreter present to help you with that can help overcome the cognitive overload of trying to think about what you should be negotiating or talking about, while also thinking about how do I say it, in this second language environment. And on and on. There's tons of other stuff that you could think about, right? But if you can manage your cognitive load more mindfully and more carefully, you're more likely then to be able to focus on the stuff that you do want to get right and do it well, because you have the capacity to do so by being careful about your management of your load.
Wow, what a class. So many strategies and so many ideas for all of us here, right? Who are taking this, who are in this session. I have a final question for you. And actually, this is just going to be an invitation for you to add some ideas to what you have already brought about how my leaders employ a global mindset to become more effective. You already talked about it, but I would like to reinforce if you would like to add something to what you already said.
Yeah, I'll go ahead because I have really been thinking about this. And, my initial reaction to this question is what can leaders do in their organizations to help their employees develop a global mindset or create a more globally mindful culture? And I really like to refer to, I don't know if y'all are familiar with it, but Bowman and Deal's 4 frames, their framework for 4 different perspectives of looking at how an organization behaves and operates. And you can look at an organization from these 4 different perspectives. There's the structural perspective, which is like policies, procedures, the actual org hierarchy. There's the human resource frame, which is really about kind of how you choose people to join your organization and how you support them and invest in them. You have the political frame, which is about living in a world of scarce resources and resource allocation. And then the symbolic frame, which is really about developing a culture or developing a meaning behind your work. And I think about the different ways just through these different frames, how a leader could implement a variety of policies or procedures, like through the structural frame, that really focus on like this open-mindedness, this global kind of reach, making their organization more global, stepping outside of their box in terms of structure and even customer base or employee base, things like that. In the HR frame, the human resource frame, you can really develop a global mindset in an organization by being willing to have, diverse hiring practices, being willing to support international hires. For the US, that means investing in H-1B visas if the international hire is what you need. And so through the symbolic frame, really making sure that people understand the beauty of a global mindset, the beauty of kind of global and cross-cultural competence. I mean, we know that diverse groups are more successful than homogenous ones. And so developing that meaning among people and making sure that you're getting diverse voices at the tables for decisions and things like that. I really think those are some ways that a leader could really develop like a globally minded company. Of course, the leader has to have a global mindset in order to do that, which is a whole different set of, things that you need to develop and strategies that you need to try. But to me, when I read that question, I was like, what are some ways the leader can make their organization, more globally mindful? And that was the framework that really jumped out at me for that.
Well, what I would add is I think a leader could be a role model, leading by example. I have seen leaders of multinational companies making fun of other cultures, making fun about their partners in other countries, what they believe, the way they talk, their accent. Well, we all have accent if we are not talking our native language. And we all have different beliefs if we compare each other, even with a person from the same culture. So I think by being leading by example and by respecting, the leader can inspire their team to do the same.
Yeah, great answer. And just as a follow-up to that, I think also reminding people that a global mindset is not the same thing as intercultural or international even yet mindset. I think a lot of people write off this idea of global mindset as, well, it's not, I don't deal with people in a cross national boundaries, and so I just don't have a need for it. It's just not my thing. And I think organizational leaders can challenge that, can role model that, but they can also build up that capacity in their organization by challenging that and helping people understand that a global mindset is going to be a strategic advantage for their organization, even in domestic situations. Crossing cultural boundaries and operating in a globalized world has much more nuance than just, am I operating in an international environment? And I think reiterating that, helping people understand that, and then understanding why it is worth their time to invest in developing a global mindset is some of the work that we can do to help promote that in organizations. Because, if we're essentially conceptualizing it as skill development, right? Like, you can develop skills through a variety of means, but one of the core elements of that is motivation to want to do it, right? To understand why it's worth our time, why it's worth our effort, why we shouldn't be mocking it or diminishing it, but actually should be championing that kind of work and that kind of development in ourselves and in our colleagues and organizations.
Well, Kaylee, Brett, and Livia, thank you so much for sharing all the insights and practical advice to the audience here. Now I'd like to go to the audience, and we have a question here from Otávio Rezende. I think that probably Livia should be the first one to answer, and then Kaylee and Brett, you're more than welcome. Otávio asks us, can you elaborate on how Brazilian leaders should act when dealing with other cultures, considering this high score of power distance of the Brazilian culture?
Sure, great question, Otávio. So the thing about differences in power distance, Brazil is high in power distance. So when we are interacting with a culture that is low in power distance, we can expect that people will confront more, maybe that will approach leaders more freely, will give ideas, or even make some criticisms about the company, about the team, the management style. So what a person from a high power distance culture can do? Be more open to that type of confrontation. Maybe it will sound disrespectful, because that's the problem, because we judge when the confrontation comes. So maybe it will sound disrespectful, it will sound that this person should not be talking to me like that, should not be criticizing, this person should not be giving this type of idea. The first thing, you should be open and not judge. And if you plan ahead, you maybe can even expect people to talk to each other more in a more assertive way, or to be more open. So I think being open and not judging their behavior is fundamental.
Would you like to add something, Kaylee, Brett? I have another question here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, folks in Brazil, if you're interacting with, in particular, maybe a U.S. organization, it might not be likely that you're talking to those super high in the hierarchy. So like, for example, I'm just like your run-of-the-mill faculty member, and I've had conversations with, higher up leaders at FDC and higher up leaders at our other international partners where, I'm not the president of my institution, but I have been trusted to work with these partnerships. And so that's something that you probably shouldn't expect, that you're always going to talk to like the people in charge, but rather folks who have been entrusted for the project. That's probably what you're going to interact with.
Yeah, and I'd say back to sense making as well, right? Trying to assign the right kind of meaning to your experiences. So if let's say you're working, Otávio, let's say you're working with a U.S. person, and that's at a lower level in the organizational hierarchy, or maybe even that reports to you in an organization, that person may feel very empowered to be assertive with you and you can try to make good sense of that. That doesn't mean that you necessarily condone that behavior. And it also doesn't, it's not a pass for people to be rude or to be outside the lane of the chain of command or to do things that are unacceptable. So that goes back into your ability to do that careful sense making and understand, is this just a behavior that's manifestation of the power distance, but is otherwise acceptable? Or does this person need some guidance and some structure to kind of get back into an acceptable kind of professional role? That is hard, but it starts with being mindful about making sense of the environment versus just reacting in a way that may initially feel to you like, whoa, this is way off, this is wrong.
Thank you. Now I have a question for Kaylee and Brett from Rony Almeida. Yes, how do Kaylee and Brett see in average the global industry leaders, top managers, in terms of global mindset? Mainly, well, I don't have the question here, just disappeared. I have here. Mainly looking for sustainability subjects. So let me do it again. How do Kaylee and Brett see in average the global industry leaders, top managers, in terms of global mindset, mainly looking for sustainability projects?
So thanks for that question. That's a difficult question. I don't want to sound judgmental or something like that or whatever, but I think we have a long way to go in terms of development of global mindset generally and cross-cultural competence in many layers of organizations. And I don't think that people being at a higher level in an organization, a senior level manager, necessarily by default have better competence in that work. That obviously is going to be highly individualistic, contextual, the individual organization, the person. But I still see lots of poor competence from people at all levels of organizations. And so I think you can either be pessimistic about that and frustrated by the lack of effectiveness, or you can view that as an opportunity for we have a lot of work to do. And you all, by your participation in this program at FDC or at Fort Hays, or even just being thoughtful enough to be engaged in the conversation today, you're probably on track to have a little bit better preparation that way than maybe some others that just really are not thinking carefully about that work.
I honestly don't have much to add to that. In terms of the sustainability industry, I would say yes. Folks in the global industry of sustainability have a long way to go. That's all I gotta say.
Well, we are approaching the end of the session, so we still have a few minutes. And I would like to thank you very much, Kaylee, Brett, and Livia, for this wonderful conversation. And I would like to invite you, as Kaylee mentioned, develop a relationship with your partner. So I would like to invite you to come to FDC in person so you can experience the culture here. I think it's going to be amazing. And for the audience here, just to make clear that we, FDC and Fort Hays, we currently have a partnership in our master's program, and we would love to have Fort Hays students in our international semesters as well, starting next year. We'll have plenty of courses taught in English, and you can enroll in as many you'd like. And they are in-person courses in our campus in Brazil. So an amazing opportunity to really develop like the global mindset, right? And then we'll share with the Fort Hays team all the details, and they will be able to share them with you. And as I mentioned in the beginning of my interaction, it is very important for us to attract international students and for Fort Hays as well, because we are offering the opportunity for you to experience this uncomfortable feeling, let's put it that way, and kind of be prepared to be comfortable when we have to face all these situations. Brett gave so many tips here that we can focus on, and don't be worried about the language, or it's not the problem. What is the focus? The contract that you're negotiating, or the aspects that you're bringing in the language skills. But we know that it tells a lot about the person. Katie talked a lot about self-awareness, and Livia as well, that how we perform in the best shape we can, we need to be okay with ourselves, right? So this is definitely the reason why we have the partnership with Fort Hays, and Fort Hays also has the partnership with other schools, because it is very important that you have the chance to experience all the challenges that we experience in life in negotiating, right? So thank you very much for the partnership. Kaylee, Brett, it's been wonderful to work with you. And before we finish, I would like to hand it to you for the final words. I'd like to invite Kaylee, Brett, and Livia before we close. Thank you so much.
I suppose I'll close and just say thank you all for coming. This has been really fun. This is something new that we've done with FDC and FHSU together, and so I'm sure that there might be other opportunities in the future. If you really liked what you heard today, we might have future global seminars as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I thank you all for your attendance, and a special thank you to Livia and Vivian and Mateus and the other members of FDC that we've worked with. I am so excited to continue to partner with FDC in a prestigious institution that you are. And so I'm just really excited for that. And I also want to extend an invitation to any of the FDC students that are on the call today, that the partnership works both ways. So just like we invite our students to participate in some of the exchange opportunities with FDC, you all are welcome and to participate in coursework at Fort Hays. More of our coursework is online, and so that's a double-edged sword. It's a different learning environment, but also you might be able to participate in that even while you're living and residing in Brazil or wherever you are. And so we've had a number of students in a number of our classes already, and that's been a very fruitful exchange opportunity for all the people present. So thank you all for your attention today, and I really appreciate getting a chance to chat with all of you.
Well, I just have to thank you all also for the attendance, for the invitation. It's been great to discuss and to learn. I think every time we share, we also learn with each other. So it was great. Thank you, Kelly, Brett, Viviane, and Mateus. And hope to see you in person sometime.
Yes, and thank you, Nathan. Thank you so much for letting me in the meeting. You saved my participation here. Thank you so much. And well, a big pleasure. And thank you so much for all of you who joined us. And I'm sure it was very interesting to everyone, and looking forward to meeting in person really soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.